All right, guys, today we're going to talk about the preterite versus the imperfect, or el preterito versus imperfecto, which is perhaps one of the hardest parts of preterite and imperfect, is knowing when to use which one. So this page gives us a rundown about preterite versus imperfect and when you use each one. Okay, remember that you use both of them to talk about the past. So both preterite and imperfect are talking about the past. Okay, you use the preterite to tell about past actions that happened and are complete. Remember, we typically ask ourselves, do we know when it started, when it ended, how many times it happened, or how long it lasted? Those are the 4 questions. Okay, we use the imperfect to talk about things that happened habitually, which means multiple times in the past, when we don't know how many times. So for example, let's look at this example sentence. It says, El sábado la clase empezó a las 10 de la mañana. So Saturday, class began at 10 o'clock in the morning. Versus down here, it began one time, so that's why we use preterite. Okay. Down here, cuando era niño, las clases empezaban a las 5 de la tarde. When I was a child, classes used to begin at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We know it happened multiple times, but we don't know how many times. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we say habitual actions in the past. We use the preterite to talk about sequence of events. So this happened, then this happened, and then this happened. Example, cuando llegamos, la profesora sacó su pintura y sus pinceles y empezó a pintar. When we arrived, the professor took out her paint and her paintbrushes, and she began to paint. Okay, we use the imperfect to give background details, such as time, location, weather, mood, and age, as well as physical and mental descriptions. So, eran las 2 de la tarde. Estábamos en el parque. Era un día de otoño. Todos estábamos muy contentos. Eran las 2 de la tarde. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's telling the time, setting the scene. Estábamos en el parque. We were in the park. Again, setting the scene. Era un día de otoño. It was a fall day. Setting the scene. Todos estábamos muy contentos. We were all very happy. So this is just, again, all of these phrases serve to describe the situation and to set the scene for the action that takes place. And most likely the action that takes place during all of this time is going to be in preterite. We use them together to form certain sentences. Okay, and usually that happens when the first part of the sentence, or one part of the sentence is setting the scene, using imperfect, and the other part of the sentence gives the action that happened at that time. So, for example, estábamos en el taller cuando entró el profesor. We were in the workshop, that's telling the scene, when entró el profesor, the professor entered. And of course, he did that one time. So that's why preterite is used here and imperfect is used here. Okay, we also use the imperfect when we are talking about 2 or more actions that are taking place simultaneously at the same time in the past. So, mientras los niños pintaban, el profesor observaba las pinturas. While, and this is a huge keyword when we have one of these sentences where 2 things are happening at the same time, mientras. Think of meanwhile to help you remember what it means. So while the kids were painting, the professor was observing the paintings. Okay? Okay, I want to direct your attention to this box up here, which is really, really, really important. Okay? It says expressions like these up here are used to indicate imperfect because generally, a menudo, regularly, muchas veces, lots of times, they indicate that things happen frequently, but we don't know how many times specifically, while these indicate specific times. Ayer, yesterday. La semana pasada, last week. Una vez, one time. These are phrases that help indicate the use of the preterite because they're more specific about when something happened. So, to recap, I'm going to kind of color code things. The preterite is used when speaking about the past, of course, but also it is used to talk about actions that happened and are complete, such as empezó. It began one time at exactly 10 o'clock. We also use preterite to give sequence of events, as demonstrated here. We use preterite together with imperfect when the imperfect setting the scene and the preterite tells what happened. And then, of course, these are our clue words for the preterite. Take a moment to write that down. I recommend a T-chart where you put preterite over here with all of its details and imperfect over here with all of its details. Okay? So imperfect is, of course, talking about the past. They both are. Okay? But we use imperfect to talk about habits or things that happen multiple times but an unknown amount of times in the past, such as era niño, empezaban. Okay, we also use imperfect to give background details, such as this paragraph right here. And we use the imperfect together with the preterite, using the imperfect to set the scene and the preterite to tell what happened. We use the imperfect, two imperfect verbs in the same sentence, when we're talking about simultaneous action. And remember that mientras is a huge clue word for that kind of sentence. And these are our imperfect clue words. So again, if you haven't done so already, take a moment to stop the video and take down all these notes. Put them in your own words, of course, because then they'll be more meaningful. Okay, in addition to the clue words for preterite on the previous page, let me switch back to the right color. In addition to the clue words for preterite on the previous page, these are other clue words that indicate that we're going to use the preterite tense, okay, because they talk about specific times. So take a moment to add these to your chart. Ayer, la semana pasada, anoche, el mes pasado, el otro día, el año pasado, entonces, hace 2 días. And with this kind of phrase, hace means ago. So you can put whatever time phrase that you want afterwards. So hace 3 minutos would be 3 minutes ago. Hace 4 años would be 4 years ago. Hace 2 días would be 2 days ago. Okay? Also, esta mañana, ayer por la mañana. Okay? And again, these are just examples of the kinds of words that are really specific about the time frame, so they indicate the use of preterite. These words, on the other hand, are clue words for the imperfect, because they indicate either habitual, or that is to say repetitive action, or they indicate background type information. Most of these, though, fall in the first category, that they indicate habitual or repetitive action. So, a menudo, generalmente, a veces, muchas veces, cada día, siempre, cada año, todo el tiempo, de vez en cuando, varias veces. Those all indicate that something happened more than one time, but it doesn't indicate how many times. Okay, here I want to guide you through a practice activity. I would really like it if you pause the video right now and you take a look at it and you try to do this on your own before I walk you through it, just to see how your understanding is before versus after, okay? So this is the moment to pause, go through, write your answers, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay, unpause. Okay, so la familia Gutiérrez, desde que eran niños, participan en muchos proyectos de arte. Completa estas frases con el tiempo verbal correcto. Okay, so the correct time. I keep doing that, darn it. Okay, the correct time period. Okay, so cuando era niño, clue word for imperfect, blank, clases de pintura, todas las tardes. There's your clue word. Okay, and since it happened every afternoon, tomaba is the appropriate word. Es de fin de semana, which is a clue word for preterite, because it's a specific time period, this weekend. Okay, so I'm going to choose the preterite one, which is me inscribí. Okay, so this weekend I registered for a ceramics contest. Número 3. La semana pasada, mi hermano Juan blank a pintar en la playa. La semana pasada is specific, so we're going to use preterite. He went to paint at the beach. Again, it happened one time. This last weekend, he did this. We're not talking about how he used to go to the beach. Then la semana pasada wouldn't make sense. Okay? But last week, he went to paint at the beach, not he used to go to paint at the beach. Okay, número 4. Blank las 2 de la tarde. So what are we doing here? We're telling the time. What do we use to tell the time? Imperfect. Eran las 2 de la tarde cuando nosotros a la clase de escultura. So it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, telling the time, setting the scene, when we blank. Llegar is arrive. So when we arrived is what we want to say, and it happened one time. We arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, so we use preterite. Ayer mi mamá en varias horas en un retrato. So yesterday my mom blank for several hours on a portrait. Ayer is a clue word for preterite, and so is several hours. So we're going to use preterite there. She worked several hours on a portrait. Number 6. Todos los años nuestra tía nos a su taller. So every year, what does that indicate? That indicates that it happened multiple times, which means we're probably going to use the imperfect. Generalmente, mis padres, el museo, todos los fines de semana. They're giving you lots of clue words here because they gave you both generally and todos los fines de semana. So every weekend, they used to visit, imperfect. Okay. A ti, ¿qué más? ¿Qué te blank más? Okay, so de niño, when you were a child. Okay, so that is indication of a time in the past that's not specific. We don't know when exactly your childhood ended. Okay, so what did you used to like? Painting classes or music classes? I hope that went well for you. Remember to keep in mind and watch out for those clue words and ask yourself the 4 questions. Do I know when it started? Do I know when it ended? Do I know how long it lasted? Or do I know how many times it happened? If your answer is yes to any of those 4, you're going to use preterite. Okay? And then on the other side of things, for imperfect, you're paying attention to, well, is this something that happened multiple times? Do I know how many times? Is this something that is merely setting the scene for something else that happened? Okay, and if it's setting the scene, or if it's a repetitive or habitual action, we use the imperfect.